Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I never planned to study abroad, but life has a funny way of pushing you in unexpected directions. After my parents' divorce and my mom's remarriage, home didn't feel like home anymore. When the opportunity came to finish my business degree in Scotland, I jumped at it. The exchange program promised affordable housing, but what they didn't mention was that most of it was controlled by a handful of landlords who treated student housing like their personal piggy banks. That's how I ended up renting from the most notorious landlord in town. My best friend from the exchange program and I were desperate for a place, and this guy owned practically every affordable apartment within walking distance of campus. During the viewing, he kept bragging about how he spares no expense for his student tenants, showing off what he claimed were brand new mattresses and a fully equipped kitchen. One day at a campus coffee shop, I met this girl who lived in the building next to mine. We hit it off, started dating, and eventually, she told me about her experience with the same landlord. She warned me about moving out, calling him a complete scammer. When I asked what she meant, she explained how she had accidentally broken one plate and lost a fork. Even though she replaced them with identical ones, he still charged her for an entire new set. When I mentioned this didn't sound legal, she revealed something even worse. Her old roommate had told her that he only replaced the broken items and kept the money for the full set, and he'd been doing this to every tenant for years. When I asked about the cost, she told me he charged her almost $200 for a $30 set and suggested I multiply that by dozens of students every year. This conversation stuck with me, especially when my best friend's lease was coming up. We spent 3 days deep cleaning everything. We even replaced a chipped mug and a scratched pan. The apartment was spotless. The landlord showed up for the inspection, walking around with this smug look on his face. He started clicking his tongue and declared that the mattress was stained and would need to be replaced. When my friend protested, saying they could barely see anything, the landlord insisted that professional standards required complete replacement and he'd have to withhold the entire deposit. My friend was shocked and pointed out that was $800 for a tiny stain, but the landlord just smugly reminded him that rules were rules and he had signed the contract. After the landlord left, my friend was practically shaking with anger. He worried aloud that the landlord would do the same thing to me when I moved out next month. That's when I had an idea. I pointed out that if the landlord was charging him for a new mattress, technically my friend owned this one. My friend's eyes lit up as he realized I was absolutely right. That night we waited until it was dark and carried the mattress down 4 flights of stairs. We knew some homeless people who stayed in the park nearby. They were always friendly when we passed by. They couldn't believe their luck when we showed up with a nearly perfect mattress. A few days later, I was in my room when I heard the landlord bringing in potential new tenants. He was giving them the usual tour when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence and shouted in shock. When the potential tenant asked what was wrong, the landlord completely lost it, screaming about the missing mattress. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. When it was my turn to move out, I knew I wouldn't see my deposit again, no matter what, so I decided to go all out. The night before my departure, I packed up everything I had bought, according to his logic. The mattress, the entire kitchen set, all the light bulbs, even the shower curtain. I left my keys in an envelope with a note explaining that since I'd paid for replacements through my deposit, I'd taken my property with me and thanked him for understanding. The homeless community in the park was thrilled with their second delivery in a month. One of them even helped me carry everything down. The next day, my phone exploded with angry messages and calls from the landlord, which I happily ignored. I later heard from other students that he had to delay all new move-ins for a week because he had to actually buy new everything this time. Apparently, he lost thousands in potential rent, not to mention the cost of replacing all the items. Last I heard, the landlord had to start using a professional property management company because too many students had heard about his scams and started refusing to rent from him directly. My wife and I were doing pretty well for ourselves until about 6 months ago. I was working as a software developer at a promising startup, and she had her own small bakery business. Everything changed when the startup suddenly went under, taking my savings with it since I'd foolishly invested a good chunk of my money in company stock. The timing couldn't have been worse. The economy was in a downturn, and my wife's bakery was already struggling with rising ingredient costs and decreasing customer spending. We tried to hold on as long as we could, but eventually we had to close the bakery and face reality. We needed to drastically downsize. That's how we ended up in Pine Grove Apartments. The rent was less than half of what we were paying before, and the landlord, this gruff old man who looked like he'd stepped right out of a Vietnam War movie, didn't care about our tanked credit score as long as we could pay the deposit. I tried to reassure my wife, telling her that this situation was only temporary. She responded sweetly, saying that as long as we were together, that's what mattered, and added that she found the landlord interesting. The old man had given us this intense stare when we first met him, like he was sizing us up. He lived right there in the complex, apartment 1A, and told us he keeps a close eye on his investment. Little did we know how literal that statement was. We'd been there for about 3 months when it happened. It was around 11 p.m. We were getting ready for bed when we heard this loud crack. Before we could even process what was happening, 2 huge guys wearing ski masks burst through our door. The first burglar immediately commanded us not to move and to keep our hands visible. The second one was already ransacking our living room. I could see my wife trembling beside me, and I felt completely useless. One of them had a knife, the other a baseball bat. The second burglar demanded to know where we kept our valuables. I tried explaining that we didn't have anything valuable since we were barely making ends meet. The first burglar responded by shoving me and demanding our laptop, phones, and my wife's jewelry. They were stuffing everything into bags when we heard this deep, gravelly voice from the doorway. Our landlord ordered them to drop everything. There he was, our 70-something landlord, holding what looked like a military-grade assault rifle with the confidence of someone who'd definitely used one before. His expression was eerily calm. The second burglar started laughing and tried to challenge the old man, but he didn't finish his sentence. The landlord squeezed the trigger, and the burglar went down screaming, clutching his shoulder. The landlord announced that this was just a warning shot, and the next one wouldn't be. He tossed me some rope and instructed me to tie them up, then ordered the uninjured burglar to slowly slide the knife over with his foot. The uninjured burglar looked at his partner who was whimpering on the floor, then at the landlord's unwavering rifle. He kicked the knife away. The landlord approved of his choice and commanded them both to lie face down with their hands behind their backs. I'd never tied anyone up before, but with the landlord giving me step-by-step instructions, I managed to secure them pretty well. The whole time he kept that rifle trained on them, never wavering. My wife announced that she had called the police and they were on their way. The landlord acknowledged this with approval, then warned the burglars that they'd better get used to prison since we don't tolerate their kind around here. When the police arrived about 5 minutes later, they seemed to know our landlord. They were calling him Sarge and treating him with a lot of respect. Turns out he was some kind of decorated Special Forces veteran who'd bought this apartment complex after retiring, and he took the safety of his tenants very seriously. While the police were taking statements, the landlord pulled us aside. He apologized about our door, promising to have it fixed by morning, and told us not to worry about that month's rent, saying we should consider it compensation for the trouble. I stammered out a thank you for everything he'd done. He brushed it off as just doing his job, then invited us to join his free self-defense class that he holds every Saturday in the courtyard. That night changed everything. Other tenants told us similar stories, how the Sarge had scared off drug dealers, chased away gangbangers, and generally kept the neighborhood safer than it had any right to be. We ended up staying there for another year, even after I found a new job and we could afford something better. Sometimes the best protection isn't a fancy security system or a nice neighborhood. It's a badass old landlord who treats his tenants like his own family and isn't afraid to remind the local criminals why they should stay away. I've been working in corporate offices for over 15 years now, with the last 12 spent at a tech company handling pretty much everything the technical teams didn't want to deal with. You name it, I did it. From managing facilities and equipment, to handling contracts and finances, even down to taking out the trash. I was basically the company's Swiss Army knife. My previous supervisor had always appreciated my work ethic. I got in countless thank you notes from various departments, and people knew they could count on me to keep things running smoothly. But everything changed when we got this new boss 3 months ago. From day one, he made it clear he wasn't like my old supervisor. He was a type who'd spend hours discussing fantasy football leagues, while urgent matters piled up on his desk. But hey, I kept doing my job, putting out fires before they spread, managing crises before they became disasters. The real trouble started about 2 weeks into his tenure. I had knocked on his office door to get his signature on some time-sensitive documents, and he was in there with his right-hand man discussing their weekend plans. When I entered, my boss looked at me with obvious annoyance and asked what I wanted in a tone that suggested I was wasting his time. I apologetically explained about the contracts needing his signature, but he cut me off mid-sentence. He told me that we needed to establish something, expressing his displeasure with what he called my constant interruptions. His second-in-command, this guy, who'd been desperately trying to get in the boss's good graces since day one, jumped right in to agree. He complained that he too had noticed how disruptive I was being. My boss then laid down his new rule. Under no circumstances was I to interrupt any conversation he was having. When I tried to explain about urgent matters that might come up, he just repeated himself more firmly, emphasizing that no circumstances meant exactly that. I would have to wait until he was done. I nodded and left, knowing full well this would blow up in their faces sooner rather than later. And boy, did karma work fast. The very next day, I found myself in a situation that would have made any reasonable person question their life choices. The big boss, the one who makes even my boss nervous, was on the phone holding for my immediate supervisor. Meanwhile, said supervisor was having what appeared to be the most riveting baseball conversation of his life with his yes man. I could see the phone line blinking from where I stood. The big boss had been holding for about 5 minutes now. Under normal circumstances, I would have interrupted immediately. This was exactly the kind of fire I was hired to manage. But orders are orders, right? So there I stood trying to catch their attention without speaking. I must have looked like a mime having an emergency, shifting from foot to foot, making desperate eye contact, practically doing everything short of interpretive dance. They both saw me multiple times. They just chose to ignore me while discussing batting averages and playoff predictions. After what felt like an eternity of watching them chat about baseball statistics, my boss finally acknowledged my existence with a condescending smirk, asking if I needed something. With perfect politeness, I told him that his boss had been holding on line 1 for the past 15 minutes and had said it was urgent. The color drained from his face faster than a baseball leaving the park on a home run. His yes man suddenly found his shoes extremely interesting. My boss demanded to know why I hadn't told him sooner. I replied with complete professionalism, reminding him that, according to yesterday's policy, I had been instructed not to interrupt any conversations under any circumstances, and I was simply following orders. I excused myself to the bathroom, even though I didn't need to go. I just wanted to give him privacy for what I knew would be an uncomfortable conversation. From what I heard later, the big boss had been trying to reach him about an urgent client issue that ended up costing the company a significant amount of money due to the delay. That afternoon, we had a brief team meeting where my boss, noticeably humbled, announced a revision to the interruption policy. From then on, I was not only allowed but encouraged to interrupt any conversation for urgent matters. Funny how quickly policies can change when they affect the right people. His second-in-command didn't have much to say during that meeting, and in fact, he barely made eye contact with anyone for the next week. I just kept doing my job, putting out fires, managing crises, and occasionally interrupting baseball conversations when duty called. My new boss suddenly developed an incredible ability to wrap up his personal conversations quickly whenever he saw me approaching his office. I met my ex-husband during college. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed to have his life figured out. We got married right after graduation, and I thought we built our dream life together. But things started changing when I got pregnant with our son. He became distant, started complaining about money, and spent more time networking at bars than being home. When our son was 4, I discovered he'd been having multiple affairs and gambling away our savings. The divorce was messy, but I managed to get primary custody. He was ordered to pay child support, which he does, though he never misses a chance to remind me about it. I've always been good with money, probably because I watched my single mom struggle while raising me. So when our divorce was finalized, I opened a savings account for our son. It wasn't much at first, just $50 a month plus whatever child benefit I received. As my career in accounting grew, I increased the monthly deposits and added extra whenever possible. It wasn't easy, especially in the beginning when I was basically starting my life over, but I made it work. Yesterday, my ex showed up at my door unannounced. He immediately started talking about the savings account. When I asked which one, trying to play dumb, he called me out on it, saying our son had told him about it. I acknowledged it casually, asking what he wanted to know about it. He demanded to see the account details and know how much was in there. I refused, explaining that it was my account that I managed for our son. He pulled the father card, claiming he had a right to know. I told him the account had nothing to do with him as I'd set it up independently. Then he tried a different approach, suggesting he wanted to contribute and make it a joint thing from both parents. When I questioned why he was only interested after 8 years, he said he wanted to be part of it now, suggesting we forget about matching what was already in there. When I asked why I should agree to this, he had the audacity to claim I could only afford to save thanks to his child support payments. I couldn't help but laugh at that. I explained that child support went to raising our son, covering his food, clothes, school supplies, and activities, not this savings account. He accused me of being selfish and deliberately trying to make him look bad, worried about how it would look when our son grew up and realized only his mom had saved for him. I told him that wasn't my problem and reminded him he'd had 8 years to start his own savings. He became more demanding, insisting he should be added to the account. That's when I brought up how he had gambled away our son's original college fund when he was 3, the one my parents had helped us start. His face turned red at that reminder. He tried to defend himself, saying it was different because he was going through a rough time. I shot back that I have been going through a rough time too, raising our son alone while he was out networking at bars, yet I still managed to save. He stormed off after that, but it didn't end there. He started sending threatening texts about taking me to court, which I simply forwarded to my lawyer. Then his current wife called. She accused me of being unfair to him, claiming he was trying to be a better father. When I asked if being a better father meant taking credit for something he had no part in, she got defensive. She said he felt left out and that I should have told him about this years ago. I responded by asking if she meant like how he told me about his affairs or about gambling away our savings. She hung up after that. The next day, my lawyer emailed me with good news. My ex had consulted his own lawyer about gaining access to the account, but since it was an individual savings account in our son's name that I set up independently after our divorce, he had no legal right to it. The best part came that evening when our son approached me about the situation. He told me his dad had called him about the savings account. When I asked what his dad had said, my son explained that his father had tried to make him feel bad about me not letting him join the account. But our son remembered what I told him about the college fund his father had lost when he was little, and he'd told his dad that if he wanted to save money, he could start his own account. I couldn't have been prouder. Like mother, like son, we both know how to handle entitled people. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.